Psalm 46, verses 1 through 3. God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. So the sons of Korah wrote Psalm 46. They wrote a lot of psalms. They have some really famous lines in some of their psalms that you'll probably recognize, like, as the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. Or how lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Some beautiful lines, but maybe no psalm was more personal to them than this psalm. This line, therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, meant something to the sons of Korah that unless you know the backstory, you can't fully grasp. So the sons of Korah obviously had Korah as a father. And in the book of Numbers, we see that Korah led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron, and Korah and 250 other men were killed. Literally, God judged them. They didn't like their jobs as Levites. They were in charge of carrying things from the tabernacle from one place to the next. They led a rebellion because they also wanted to be priests, and God judged them, and God literally caused the earth to open up in an earthquake and suck these men down, and the rest were burned up with fire. This is how the sons of Korah started off their life, by having to hear stories about how their father led a rebellion, and now they write this in Psalm 46. So when they write this, and this is important for us to see, they were dealing with the devastating effects of sin and chaos, which you see in this passage because it's clear. Look how chaotic this passage is. The earth give way. The mountains fall into the heart of the sea. Its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. To the average Jewish person, nothing was more chaotic than the sea. And we see it here. It's raging, it's foaming, the earth is opening up. It's a scene of chaos, of devastation and destruction. This wasn't hypothetical for the sons of Korah. Their father had literally been sucked into the earth and had been killed. But what we see about this, and this is what's important, because we're having to deal with a lot of effects of sin. We're seeing some devastation. We're seeing problems. And if we're not careful, it's going to make us more angry, and it's going to lead us further into darkness and sin rather than driving us closer to God. And so what I want us to see is, for the sons of Korah, this was not hypothetical. This was experienced. They had to start off by dealing with their anger towards God and their anger towards the people of God for their father being killed. And yet they let it drive them closer to God, not further away, closer to the light, not closer to the darkness. And that's really important for us. So that's what I want us to look at today, because I would rather us wrestle with God like Job or Jacob or the sons of Korah and get closer to God rather than not wrestling with God and our hearts being hardened like Pharaoh. The scene, like I said, is deeply chaotic. If you've ever been in a situation where sin has gotten its tentacles deeply into people or families, it's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. If you've ever seen addiction or abuse or a tragic death or a marriage falling apart or the murder of a family member, to see how it affects people brings out the best in some people and causes the worst in some people. It's really devastating. And so what we see from the sons of Korah is it drove them to the light, and I hope that it can drive us to the light, because if you're not careful, the effects of sin, the devastation of sin that you've experienced, that you're encountering now, or that you have encountered in the past, they stay with you longer than you think. Most psychologists will tell you, if you have an experience that you can recall in your mind and it's older than 18 months and you still have this emotional response to it, then you haven't dealt with that in the past, and it's still kind of following you around and it's causing problems. And it's chaotic right now. The problems that we're seeing in our country, every time I flip on the news, I feel angry, I feel mad, and it's not a solution that can easily be worked out. And I find myself getting angry and just saying, I've got to turn off the news. But what it's forcing us to do is it's forcing us to see the effects of sin, and it's forcing us to see the effects of sin in ourselves. And we have to remember that, like every great superhero usually begins by having an encounter with evil and seeing the effects of sin and saying, I want to do what I can to fight against it. But every great supervillain has a tendency to do the same thing. They have this encounter with evil and they decide to go further into the darkness. And what we see from the sons of Korah is this same situation, and they came through it better and stronger. So how? Well, they had experienced it on a very personal level. Like I said, it wasn't hypothetical for them. And they did something that's very important. They did not deny that God was involved with it. They really didn't even have a chance to deny that God was involved with it. The Word of God says that God directly caused it and did it. But it must have been devastating to grow up and to hear that from people about what their father had done. And so many people, when they feel anger towards God, when they feel like God has taken away a loved one, or God has allowed a disease to come in their life, or God has allowed them to experience financial hardship, or God has allowed them to see the end of a marriage or some sort of relationship, or the loss of a loved one, they get bitter and angry towards God. And that's very, very normal. And it's something I'm sure that they had to battle with a great deal. Even many atheists seem to be mad at God. Doug Wilson says basically the mindset of most of the atheists that he's had debates and arguments with have been this: there is no God, and I'm really mad at him. And that's the basic mindset that a lot of us feel. There's a lot of anger, and what we see here is that the sons of Korah somehow dealt with it without denying that God had anything to do with it. The effects of sin. So what this time is doing with the coronavirus, it's forcing us to kind of see two great truths. The effects of sin are devastating, and they're devastating to us. Like I said, flip on the news. I see some of these political parties and some of these things going on. It makes my blood boil. And then I have to ask myself, what kind of person am I being right now? If I'm allowing myself to be sucked into this darkness and this hatred, I don't want to be a part of that. And it's so easy to get sucked into it right now. But the effects of sin are devastating. Families are turning on families. Corporate businesses are doing amazing things to people, amazing things for some of their employees, and some of them are doing terrible things to their employees. We're seeing some businesses do great things and some businesses do terrible things. We're seeing some politicians try to do great things, and we're seeing some politicians try to do terrible things. So we're seeing all of this, and it's really forcing us to see evil, really forcing us to see the effects of sin in a way that maybe we haven't had to deal with in a long time. The other thing that it's really forcing us to deal with is to understand that God is still sovereign over this, and he controls it, and he could stop it if he wants, but he's choosing to allow it to progress. And we can't deny that as Christians. We can't simply say, oh, well, God is not sovereign. He doesn't know what's going on. That's really not doing justice to God, and it's really kind of pointless to say that. Deuteronomy 32 says this: there is no God besides me. It is I who put to death and give life. I have wounded, and it is I who heal, and there is no one who can deliver from my hand. There's a passage in Exodus that says, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him dumb or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now, we know that God is not the author of sin. He's not the inventor of sin. And we know, for example, like in the book of Job, it says that Satan afflicted Job with sores, but then later, when Job's wife urges him to curse God, Job says, shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? God is not the author of sin. God is not the inventor of sin. But God is controlling sin, and if God wanted to stop this, he could, and he's choosing not to. He's choosing to allow it to go on, and I think that's important for us to remember, because unlike us, we could easily say, God is allowing it, but it's according to his will. The sons of Korah had to deal with this and understand that the Lord directly caused it. The Lord wiped their father and two other 150 people out. He took them out. And yet they still allowed it to drive them closer to God and not further away. The effects of sin, if we're not careful, really, when we experience them personally, can really be tremendous, and they impact us in ways we don't expect. I remember having a conversation with a lawyer that I used to work with when I was in college, and he had served in Vietnam. And he told me one of the most life-changing events of his life was seeing two soldiers hold one another at gunpoint. Now, these are both American soldiers. Hold one another at gunpoint, and an argument over who got to sleep in a bed or not. And he says, when you see things like this happening, it changes you. It affects you. That's why soldiers come back oftentimes with PTSD. They're having trouble dealing with evil in the effects of sin in their life. It's powerful. They did a study years ago with rhesus monkeys, and they put a rhesus monkey in a cage, and they had squares on the floor of the monkey's cage. Red squares, green squares, and yellow squares. First, they electrified the red squares. So when the monkey stepped on the red square, it would shock him. The monkey became agitated, became a little bit nervous, but began to avoid the red squares. Then they electrified the red and green squares, and the monkey would step on the red and green squares and be shocked. And within a couple of weeks, the monkey was acting as a manic depressive, showing anxiety disorders, was kind of shrinking away from any contact with people. Then they electrified the red, the green, and the yellow squares, where there was no place the monkey could go without being shocked. And within about another couple of weeks, the monkey was biting himself, using the bathroom on himself. He had literally been driven crazy in less than a month. The effects of sin, the shocks that we feel from sin, are devastating. They change us. They can drive us crazy. They can make us depressed. They can make us anxious. And this is happening now. We're probably going to see some fallout from this in the coming months that we don't expect. There was an NPR story about the healthcare workers in China. And they're now saying that about half of the healthcare workers in China are claiming that they're depressed or anxious. A third of them are saying that they have insomnia because what NPR calls moral injury. They're saying that they went through this difficult problem of seeing the effects of sin, of death, younger people dying, people suffering, them not being able to tend to them, not being able to touch them oftentimes because of the coronavirus, not being able to be with these people, not being able to save them, but also them really having to deal with the effects of this because they admit they were scared. Some of them didn't want to work, and yet they knew they had to. And they're saying because of this, it's causing a moral injury, it's causing depression, it's causing anxiety, it's causing lack of sleep. And they're saying we have put so much emphasis on PPE, personal protective equipment for our healthcare workers, but they say what we really need to focus on was a different kind of PPE, which is psychological protective equipment. That so much of this is having an effect on us that we really don't even understand at this time. The effects of sin are devastating when you experience them. And so this is a time for a lot of us that we're experiencing it in a way that we really haven't had to experience it before. You have to deal with it. You have to deal with it. Just in general, not even talking about the virus, just in general, we're all going to have to experience evil. We're all going to have to experience the effects of sin. We're all going to have to experience people around us suffering and addiction and trouble and lying and all of these types of things that we have to deal with in life and death. It's something that you can't avoid. Jordan Peterson talks about in the movie Sleeping Beauty. Most of us have probably seen Sleeping Beauty. What happens? The king and the queen get pregnant. They have a baby. They're older in life. They want that she's the beautiful princess. They want her protected. So they have a birthday party for her, and they don't invite Maleficent. They don't invite the evil one. They don't want evil around their child. But guess what? Evil shows up anyway. You can't avoid it. Evil shows up. And so we can't just act like evil doesn't exist. We have to be realistic about it. And we have to be realistic that when we meet God, we have this idea in our minds for some reason that when we meet God, that everything's great, everything's beautiful, everything's wonderful and easy, and it's just simply not the case. To meet God is to wrestle with God. The word Israel means to wrestle with God. It means that you've had this impact with God, this encounter with God, and you're struggling and wrestling around. Believe me, when I hear people talk about knowing Christ and their relationship that they have with Christ, and they act like it's all wonderful and nothing ever happens, he never disagrees with them, he never challenges them on anything, it always makes me wonder if they really actually have a relationship with Christ, because my relationship with Christ seems to be a lot tougher. And when I look in the Bible, it seems to be a lot tougher. That people that interacted with God usually kind of hurt. It was tough. Martin Lloyd-Jones has this great expression which I love. He says, how do you know that you've met God? You walk with a limp. That's how you know you've met God. If you wrestle with God, you walk with a limp. It just simply is the truth of the matter. So when you meet God, You might think your encounter with evil is over, but it's not. Because when you encounter God and you're really wrestling with God in your life, you start to see evil in the world and evil in yourself more clearly than ever. And it's going to force you to either decide that you want to fight a battle for good or you want to fight a battle for bad. This is why I think so many of us see this in cops, and it either really inspires us or it kind of really scares us. The average cop has to deal with the worst people in society, and the biggest majority of them, when they see this evil, they say, I want to fight against it. You think about the job of cops. I mean, these guys don't make that much money, and these men and these women, they put their lives on the line for us to do all the stuff that we're too scared to do. You know, we call them at 3 o'clock in the morning, we hear someone outside, can you come and look? Because we don't want to. And they come and do it. Because most of these people have encountered evil and they say, I want to go the other way. A handful, a small percentage of them go the bad way. And when they do, boy, does it look bad. But it can't be avoided. It forces you to a decision. When you wrestle with God, He shows you so much of the evil in your life, and He says, now then, fight against it. Fight against it. Run to the light. You'll walk with a limp, though. You'll walk with a limp because it hurts. It hurts, and you have to be honest with God. And the way that the psalmist tells us in Psalm 46 to deal with this is run to Him. Run to the person who is our refuge. In the midst of chaos, run to the person who is our refuge. And we can be honest with Him when we get there. We don't have to be fake and phony. We can be honest with Him. Listen to this. The sons of Korah wrote Psalm 88, which is a really dark psalm. This is how it ends. Like, it's one of the few psalms that ends without a lot of hope. But I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? From my youth I have suffered and have been close to death. I have borne your terrors and I'm in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. You have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. Tim Keller says about that passage, what he's really saying is that he's saying darkness is a better friend than you, God. That's how the psalm ends. So it's chaos. He's being honest. It's scary. The seas are raging. Mountains are quaking. The earth could open up. It's scary out there in the world right now. And you can be honest with God. Run to Him as a refuge and be honest with Him. I think it was the philosopher Young that said the best type of wisdom was earned wisdom, that we should be careful of unearned wisdom. This is earned wisdom from the sons of Korah. They knew what it was like for the earth to give way, and they said, you know what, though it does, you don't have to fear. You can go to God. He is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble. It's pretty amazing. They say run to Him and be honest, because within the chaos of sin, there's a refuge. Now, this is interesting. What is a refuge? Sometimes we forget this. The sons of Korah talk about a refuge. In other psalms, they talk about that God is our rock, that He's our shield. But what is a refuge? What is a shield? A shield what? Takes the blow for you. A shield takes the blow for you. What is a refuge? What is a house when you go to it for refuge? Well, it keeps out the wind. It keeps out the dirt. It keeps out the sun that's beating down on you. It keeps out the rain that's going to pour down on you. It takes the blow of all those things for you. It takes the blow. And that's what he's saying. God is our refuge. He takes the blow for us. It's undeniable when you read the sons of Korah Psalms, even this psalm, if you read it all the way through, it's undeniable just how unbelievably fascinated and drawn to the temple of God, the tabernacle of God, the places of worship of God. It's really crazy. I mean, listen to some of these lines. Then I will go to the altar of God, to God my joy and my delight. Within your temple, O God, we meditate on your unfailing love. Or Psalm 84, how lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints for the courts of the Lord. Even the sparrow has found a home there, and a swallow a nest for herself, where she may have her young. A place near your altar, Lord Almighty. My King and my God, blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are ever praising you. And you say, well, what does that have to do with the Lord being our refuge and taking the blow for us? Look, we forget what it was like to go into the house of the Lord and to not come into a church where there's places to get coffee and places to sit down and there's a preacher up here at a pulpit giving a lesson. When they walked into the temple, there was blood everywhere. Listen to this quote from Andrew Bonar. When the worshipers went into the temple singing, by the way, singing one of the psalms from the sons of Korah, how amiable are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs, yea, even fainteth for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Blessed are they that dwell in the house of the Lord. And when they arrived, saw in these courts blood on the altar, blood in the bowls on the altar, blood on the four horns of the altar, blood on the sides, blood meeting the eye at every turn. None but a deeply convicted soul, none but a soul really alive to the guilt of a broken law, could ever enter and sing with those worshipers, how amiable are thy courts, end quote. In other words, when they went into the temple, blood everywhere. And yet they were saying, how lovely are your courts. They knew that that had to do with guilt. So there had to be something within them that said, God will take the blow for us. It's amazing. When you look back at that passage in Numbers, when the men were swallowed into the earth, most of the Israelites react exactly how we would react. Exactly how we would react. They go to Moses and Aaron, and they're in absolute chaos. And they're saying, the earth is going to swallow us too. The earth is going to swallow us. You go into the temple, you see all the blood, your natural reaction is, the Lord is going to swallow us too. But instead, the Lord's response is, no, I'm not. The earth is going to swallow my son. The earth is going to swallow Christ so that you can live. They saw that he took the blow for them, that Jesus went into the earth for us instead of us all being swallowed into the earth, so that now we can have a refuge. This is what Matthew 12 says. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. No, God says. No. The earth isn't going to swallow you. It isn't going to swallow you, the sons of Korah. It's going to swallow my son instead. That's powerful. That's powerful because we can now go to him as our refuge. They knew God would take the blow for them. You say, well, how much of that did they know? Did they really understand exactly who the Messiah was? Well, probably not exactly, but they did write this line. They wrote Psalm 45, and in verse 7 it says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. And that's quoted in Hebrews 1, talking about Jesus. He's their refuge, and he's also their strength. Okay, what do you mean? Why their strength? Because when you see evil and you're in a fight against it, you think, oh, that's great, that's easy. It's exhausting trying to do the right thing in the midst of chaos and death and destruction and people sitting on it. It's so incredibly difficult. It's exhausting. Listen, there is this passage in Mark where it says, Jesus went to get on the boats with his disciples, and it said, and they took him just as he was. And Fred Craddock, in one of his sermons, has this great quote where he says, what does that mean, just as he was? This is what it means, he said. Whipped down, bedraggled, hungry, bent over already, half asleep from the pain. What does it mean, just as he was? No time to clean up, freshen up, dress up, or change clothes. He's worn out. But that's unusual, isn't it? What's he been doing? He's been teaching, he's been preaching, he's been healing, he's been helping. Aren't all these exhilarating things? You think, I could just do that all the time, helping and healing and teaching and preaching and giving and going and doing for people? Why, that's the most uplifting thing in the world. Why is he so whipped? He isn't coming off a 12-hour shift at the factory. He hasn't been digging ditches all day. He's been helping. What's so exhausting about Christian work? What's so exhausting about ministry? End quote. It's exhausting. If you've ever tried to fight against it, It's absolutely exhausting. But the way to be encouraged and the way to be energized is to go to him as a refuge, and you will be strengthened. How? How will that happen? Because when you enter into his presence as a refuge and strength, when you're in the presence of God, what you hear from him, first of all, what you see when you get there is you see light, you see grace, you see beauty, and we are transformed. 2 Corinthians 3 says we're transformed as we see him. As we behold the glory of Christ, we're becoming like Christ. And what you hear from him is that you are accepted and that you're loved. Henry Newen says this: why is it important that you're with God and God alone on the mountaintop? Why is it important that you pray? It's important because it's the place in which you can listen to the one who calls you his beloved. To pray is to listen to the one who calls you my beloved daughter, my beloved son, my beloved child. To pray is to let that voice speak to the center of your being, to your guts, and to let that voice resound in your whole being, end quote. Why is prayer so important? It's not just that we get to ask for things. It's that when we're in the presence of God, when he's our refuge, when he's our strength, what are we hearing from him? We're hearing that we're accepted, that we're his child, that he loves us. It's absolutely the only thing that will energize you and keep you going in ministry, I promise you, because it's exhausting. It's exhausting. The rhesus monkey study that I was telling you about earlier, after about a month, the monkey was crazy. Absolutely crazy. So what they did was took him to a cage with a white floor, with soft music playing, and then the researchers held him, and they fed him, and they played with him. And within about 2 weeks, the monkey started to explore his cage. And within a few more days, the monkey couldn't be seen as any different than the other monkeys. Total recovery. Even when they put him back into the cage with the red, green, and yellow squared floor, he was nervous for a couple days, but then after a couple days, totally fine. The story where I got that from, instead of the book, the author says this, somewhat sarcastically, of course. He says, but hey, that's just a dumb monkey. Monkeys don't know how to hold on to the past forever. They just know how to adapt to changing circumstances. Evil changes us, but his grace and his light changes us even more. When you behold his glory in the scriptures, it changes you into the likeness of Christ, and one day we will be like him. 1 John 3 says, dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known to us, but we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. All who have this hope in him purify themselves just as he is pure. We know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. He hasn't left us here in the chaos by ourselves. He is our refuge. I don't know if you know the story of Kitty Genovese, 1964 in Manhattan. She was coming into her apartment early in the morning, and a man attacked her. She was crying out for help, and people in the apartments heard her. Some of them turned on their lights, but no one wanted to go down and really engage and interact with the problem and get into the fray. And so no one came down. So her attacker ran off, but eventually when he saw no one was coming to help, actually came back and finished attacking her and killed her. Tim Keller says about that passage, what's awesome about that is that it's like Jesus was up in that apartment hearing all the chaos and all the destructiveness of sin. He heard our cries, but instead of turning off his light, he came down. He came down for us and went into the earth for us. So the psalm is so beautiful to me. It's so encouraging to me because it's realistic. It's not saying that there's not chaos. It's not saying that there's not sin. It's not saying that there's not devastation, that there's not disease. And it's not saying God isn't in charge of it. What it's saying is in the midst of it, we don't have to fear because God is our refuge and our strength and ever-present help in trouble. So here's what I'm kind of concluding with, too. I cannot promise you that in your cage of life that the tiles won't occasionally light up and shock you. I'm sure they will. As a matter of fact, I know they will. What I'm promising you is in the midst of that, there is a place that you can go where the floor is white, where soft music is playing, and where there's someone there that wants to nourish you and feed your soul. He is a refuge and an ever-present help in trouble. Though the earth give way, we will not fear. I hope this helps. Hope you have a great day. God bless you.